Hey, you want to hear something cool? Hear the thing. In the early 1800s, Allegan County, West Michigan, a legend was born that was terrifying. This legend began at Junction Insane Asylum, an asylum that specialized in patients who suffered from a malady known as hydrocephalus, or excessive head fluids. These fluids would cause distortions of the cranium and the head, so much so that the patients were in constant pain. Some of them were so distorted they couldn't even lift their heads. That amount of consistent, excessive pain caused many of them to go insane, hence the need for an insane asylum. But when they arrived at that asylum, many of them were tortured or experimented upon. In attempts to try to solve hydrocephalus, many of these doctors made things much worse. When funding ran out and the asylum was closed, they opened the door and released the hydrocephalic patients out in the woods to fend for themselves. Some versions of this story actually say that they killed the staff before leaving, dismembering them horribly. Something of note here is that Junction Insane Asylum doesn't exist on any record, but in its exact location, there is a Junction Prison, a very small privately funded prison that, when the funding ran out, they sold it off to a family called the Felt family. The Felt family converted the location into what is now the abandoned Felt Mansion. The Felt children stated many times that as they were growing up, they would explore the caves and caverns underneath Felt Mansion, several times finding what they considered to be dismembered limbs, and on occasion seeing a hydrocephalic patient themselves that they called the Wobbleheads. The rest of Michigan would know them as the Melonheads. There are numerous versions of this story across the United States. In neighboring Ohio, a famous version takes place in Kirkland. This centers around an orphanage. Whether the orphans were regular orphans who were turned into hydrocephalic patients, or whether they were hydrocephalic orphans to begin with, is varying across numerous versions of this story. Another variance is the mad scientist type doctor who experimented upon them. In almost every instance, the doctor's name is Crow, but the spelling could be Crowe, Krowe, or even Kroh. In most of these versions, this mad scientist doctor would experiment on them, injecting more and more fluids into their cranium and heads until they found out what happened. This caused far more pain, far more insanity, and eventually the orphans revolted, killing the doctor and burning the orphanage to the ground. To this day, there have been sightings along Wisner Road of these various Melonheads. In every one of these sightings, it's said that they are extremely violent when they see someone who isn't like them. Hence the phrase, if you see a Melonhead, run. Connecticut and many others have changed locations and names, but it's the same basic story. Hydrocephalic patients are tortured. They eventually revolt and escape. They run off into the woods to fend for themselves. They form their own languages out of clicks, chirps, grunts. They cause their condition to be worse through generations of inbreeding, and almost all of them seem to live underground. One thing is consistent across every story. The Melonheads are violent towards anyone that doesn't look like them. So if you see a Melonhead, run. This has been the story of the Melonheads. I'm Brian P. Gallagher. Join me next time on Hear the Thing. Hey, you want to hear something cool?